G'day guys, how's it going? So in this video, we're going to continue looking at structs, and specifically what we're going to look at here is how we can better initialize them. So what I've got on screen at the moment is two players that are instantiated using the general struct initializer. But if we look at them both, we can see that they're sharing some common default values. So we can see here we've got 0 for account balance, and is active is true, and that's the case with the second one as well. All right, so wouldn't it be better if we could just have one place where we default these values, and then for anything that we care about, we can pass them in as parameters, and that kind of gives it away, right? This idea of parameters, because what I'm going to recommend now is that we create a function to create our structs, right? So this is common practice where we can go like, say, create player, and then we're going to pass in basically three strings, right? The three different values. So we've got username, for example, that's a string. We've got first name, that's a string. And then we've got last name, and that's a string, right? Now, the way I've named these are important in these arguments, and I'll get to why in a minute. But it's going to, sorry, not return string, it's going to return player. And then basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy most of what's here and then just return it here. And the only difference will be is that for username, we'll set username. First name, we'll set that to first underscore name. And then last name, well, we're obviously going to set that to last underscore name. Cool. So now we've created a function that will be in charge of creating any new players, right? So now I can refactor this code a bit, and we can change it to calling create player, and the parameters we're going to pass in is the first three here. All right, and I'm going to get rid of this code below. And what I'm going to do is basically get rid of the naming here. And we've got our three parameters, right? And we need to get rid of this bit here as well. So now we're just creating our function. We're passing in the three values as strings, and they're being passed into here. So when I save this, you can see everything looks good. There's no errors. Now, this is one good way of doing this, but we can actually improve this a little bit based on what we've currently got here, because what you can see is for username, we're setting it to username, and for first name, we're setting it to first name. But the capitalization and the overall casing is the same. So what you can do in Rust is you can use something called the field init shorthand syntax. And what that means is if I'm using an argument with the same name as the field here, I can just not include it at all, right? So I can just do that, and now that will still compile, right? And obviously, whoops, I clicked on the thing, but I can obviously do the same for these as well. And now the only thing that needed to be initialized was the account balance and is active. Cool. So that is a pretty decent approach on how we can initialize multiple structs of the same type, right? So in the future, if you want to create another struct, you would use the same kind of function like this, and you can just call this everywhere in your code, right? Now, the reason why we're passing strings and not string slices like this is because basically when you create structs, they won't let you do this, right? So, well, actually they will, right? They will. In fact, no, they won't. So the reason why they won't, actually, I just remembered, is because if we set an STR like this, it's forcing us to use something that could be available for the lifetime of the program, right? So if you just create, say, for example, if I go forward with this and just ignore the warning for a second, if I now come in and set a string literal like this, now this string here will live for the life of the program. The problem with this is once something that's attached to a struct lives for the life of the program, so too does the struct. So we can't do this, right? Because if this lives forever, that means this player one will live forever. And we don't want that, right? So that's why we generally use strings here, because they're only available for the time that they're used, right? Hang on, let's go back one more step. Okay, so hopefully that makes a bit more sense. Now, for the second player here, I could also call create player, but let's just go through the process of what we may do if for whatever reason we wanted to copy this player, right? Now, obviously, you might have seen in the past when I've used stream, we can go dot clone, but you'll see on this struct, there is no dot clone, right? Now, that's not because we can't do it. It's just we can't do it out of the box, right? So one approach until we learn how to clone things is to basically use something called a struct update syntax. And it looks a little bit like this. So say, for example, I want to keep all the fields from player one, right? And the only thing I want to update on player two from what player one's got is the username, right? What we can do is we can say, okay, cool. Let's just delete all the fields here. And it's going to complain saying you need to fill in all the fields. But if we go dot player underscore one, this is now going to pick up all the remaining fields that are available, all right, that are available in this particular struct and apply them to this player. Cool? So this is what we refer to as the struct update syntax, because you got this dot syntax, and then it's updating this struct based on the details from the other struct. Now, we still have a problem, and essentially this is a borrowing issue where we're trying to borrow, or we're trying to change ownership here. So the ownership got changed when we did this, right? So now player one dot first name can't be accessed because it's been the ownership has changed to player two, right? So this string here, or these two strings here, have been sent over. So the way around that is that we could do basically something like this. We could say first name, and we can say either string from, and we use the reference to player one dot first name. That's one way. Or the other way is that we can go, say for last name, we go player one dot last name dot clone. And that will give you a copy of the last name from player one. And both these will work. I'm not sure why username was complaining there for a second. Maybe it was syntax. But essentially, this is another way you can copy it. So just be mindful when you use this struct update syntax that it will take into consideration any objects that may have their ownership changed as a result of doing this this syntax. So a little confusing, maybe. Just play around with it yourself and see if you can get a good understanding of it. But that's where I'm going to end the video here, and I'll see you all in the next one.